Are you ready to embark on a journey of success? To discover your true potential in the untold stories of careers in life sciences? Welcome to PATHFINDER by the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology and Infectious Disease. With your host, Tommy Soares, discover the untold stories of industry scientists and unveil the secrets to excelling in your career. Thank you for joining us once again, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Welcome, everybody. My name is Tommy Soares. I'm Director of Scientific Strategy and Relations of the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology and Infectious Disease. And today on Pathfinder, I have the pleasure of welcoming Michelle Korf, the Production Planning Manager at Evonik. Michelle started her professional journey at Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology, studying chemical engineering with a minor in biochemical engineering. She graduated in 2018 and shortly after started working at Evonik in Lafayette, Indiana, as a process engineer. Evonik Lafayette, Indiana is a contract manufacturer for many major pharmaceutical companies, and Michelle spent her time in engineering providing technical engineering support for various commercial chemical manufacturing processes and designing scale-up manufacturing processes for pharmaceuticals that were still in clinical trials. After her time in process engineering, Michelle worked as a production superintendent supporting one of the small molecule manufacturing buildings. Currently, Michelle works in supply chain as a production planning manager for Evonik Lafayette and manages the production schedule for all small molecule manufacturing at Evonik Lafayette. Michelle also recently completed her MBA at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and that is why we wanted to talk to her today. And it's such a great pleasure welcoming you to the program. Michelle, thank you for being on, and thank you for being our Pathfinder today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
It is awesome to be able to talk to you as you are just coming out of this MBA. And I know because we met, my gosh, it must have been almost like a year ago, right? At that function at 16 Tech in Indianapolis. And I thought, oh, how interesting would it be to capture your story as you were going through this MBA. And now that you finished it and it's fresh off of your shoulders, we want to hear all about it. And maybe tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into chemical manufacturing and this whole field.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to kind of where it all began. So growing up, I feel like I have that really typical story of people who become engineers, where I was really good at math and I was really good at science, specifically chemistry. And I really liked doing both of those subjects. And so the obvious choice for me was going into chemical engineering. And so through a family friend, I learned about Rose-Hulman, and I ended up choosing to go there and majored in chemical engineering, like I said, because of the kind of interest in math and science. And pretty quickly into my time in college, I realized that I wanted to work in the pharmaceutical industry. Partly because I thought the chemistry was really interesting. And also I liked the concept of doing something that is, directly benefiting people in this world. There are a lot of people out there that have really serious diseases, and being part of the solution to that and helping people feel better was really interesting to me. So that was part of the reason behind the minor in biochemical engineering as well. So that was the motivation there. And throughout my senior year in college, I actually struggled a little bit to find a job. Most people at Rose-Hulman in chemical engineering have a job by, you know, October, November of their senior year, and I didn't get mine until April, which all things considered is not really an issue at all. I mean, I had a job before I graduated, but I kind of wanted to mention that just from like a student's perspective. Um, if you're not following, the typical timelines of what people expect from you, that you can feel like a failure. That's kind of what I felt like. But around, the March or April timeframe of my senior year, I found out about Evonik, and I learned that Evonik was working in the pharmaceutical industry. So maybe to explain a little bit more about what we do. So the company as a whole is considered a specialty chemical company. So you're not going to go into a store and see anything made by Evonik. You're not going to see any Evonik branded products, but Evonik makes ingredients that go into a lot of the products that you would see when you walk into a store. So we make, ingredients that make mattresses softer. We make ingredients that make diapers more absorbent. Here at Evonik in Lafayette, we make the active ingredient for pharmaceuticals. So we don't make the pill or the vaccine that somebody would be putting into their body, but we make the active ingredient. So what goes into a person's body and actually cures whatever disease they're dealing with. And so I found this out about Evonik, and I was like, perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. I want to get into the pharmaceutical industry. And something that was kind of unique to Evonik is that we're a contract manufacturer. So we're not making, X ingredient every day, 365 days a year. We have a pretty big portfolio of different products that we're making. So we're always, you know, it's very dynamic. We're learning new things, we're making new products, we're learning how to make the same products better. And that was something that I was really attractive to me about Evonik as well, is it seemed like a very dynamic environment where I would learn a lot, where I would get a lot of experience really quickly. And so that was kind of the motivation for starting my work at Evonik and being a process engineer here.
That's awesome. And to know that you had early inspiration to get into this whole field and chemical engineering. What I mean, what did you know at that time about chemical engineering that attracted you? And meaning, like, did you know the difference between chemical engineering and just being a chemist, for example?
Yeah, I think at the time I knew a little bit because I had some internships during college. So I did get some experience in, what I would say the real world of chemical engineering. And to me, the difference that I saw was, being a chemist, and um, this is definitely true here at Evonik, is you're kind of working in the smaller scale. You're developing chemical processes, you're doing experiments to, find things out about a certain chemical process. Whereas with chemical engineering, you're looking at the larger scale. In many cases, and specifically here at Evonik, you're looking at the larger scale. You're looking at how do we make this on a 50 gallon, a 1,000 gallon, 2,000, 4,000 gallon scale. And you're also looking at some different principles. So, in chemistry, you're focused more on like the specific chemical aspects of this process. Whereas when you're an engineer, you're looking at um, like agitation, you're looking at heat loss, you're looking at material properties. It's just a different group of things that you're looking at, and at a different scale as well. Um, and that was more interesting to me than kind of working in a lab and working on, smaller scale things. I kind of liked the aspect of these big, massive tanks and and some of the different concepts that you learn in engineering versus in chemistry.
Yeah, absolutely. And at that scale, as you said, it must have been impressive too, like to realize, oh my gosh, how many gallons of what? And so tell us a little bit. So your time at Rose-Hulman, it seemed like it was very rich in terms of the techniques that you learned and just understanding how some of these manufacturers function. Tell us a little bit about that aspect of it in terms of was there any engagement with industry, or what was the level of like exposure that you had to help you prepare for what you were going to be doing in industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the most valuable experience for me was the internships, which I was able um, to secure thanks to like the career fairs put on at Rose-Hulman. But I think from a like kind of classroom perspective, what I really liked, and I think other chemical engineering programs do this as well, but we would essentially learn kind of the standard concepts of chemical engineering through, our courses like thermodynamics and heat transfer and fluid dynamics, kind of all of those standard courses. But then when we got later into the program, as a junior or a senior, we also got opportunities to kind of apply all of that in more of a real world setting. So for example, we had a unit operations class. I took 3 semesters of that where we would get a project that would kind of combine some of those principles together. So one of the semesters I worked on a um, a reactor and seeing how like different principles like stirring would impact how fast a reaction goes. Or there was one project that I worked on the distillation column that kind of brought a lot of the concepts together. And a lot of those projects I think were developed with kind of your standard industry challenges in mind. And also, my senior year, I got to work on a project with actually a woman who was in the industry looking to start up a whiskey distillery. So that was a really cool project where we essentially applied a lot of the concepts that we were learning in some of those courses that I mentioned to kind of help design this chemical process for making whiskey. And so I really liked the way that it was structured, where again, you're learning all of these practical, theoretical concepts, and then you're given these kind of bigger projects where you're mixing all of these concepts together to come up with a solution to a problem. And that's exactly what you do in industry, right?
Yeah.
In real life, you've got all of these principles and theories coming together, and there's inevitably going to be problems that you have to learn how to solve. And so it's not just knowing the principles and the theories, it's also learning how to be a problem solver and put those things together to solve these real world issues.
And do it with other people
Mm-hmm.
in the team, other people in the solution, part of the solution and formula. Was it so? Do you feel that you had good preparation and that you were ready to embark on this career towards Evonik, towards industry applications?
Yes and no. I've talked with a lot of students about this because I get that question a lot of like, how do I prepare? Like, what do I
Yeah,
need to know?
right.
And I think, well, I say yes because I am very confident in the strength of the education that Rose-Hulman gave me. I think it really prepared me with the engineering concepts that I needed to know. But what was difficult in the transition between college and industry for me was just learning how to apply those concepts in real world scenarios when you're under time pressure, when you're fresh out of college and haven't done any of this before.
Yes.
And there's high stakes. And so maybe to go into that a little bit more, I think also being in the pharmaceutical industry makes it more challenging as well, because in many other industries that aren't as regulated, you can kind of go out into the plant and maybe tweak some variables in the process without really having specific documentation behind it, because there's just not as many regulations if you're looking at like the oil and gas industry maybe, whereas we're making stuff that's going to go into a person's body. So there's a lot of regulations, rightly so. I'm not arguing that there should be less regulations,
Right.
but anytime I want to go out and troubleshoot an issue in the plant, I have to have very specific documentation and justification for what I'm doing. And that makes it a little bit more difficult. So, transitioning out of college into this industry, there was a lot of training that I had to go through first in order to be able to kind of function as an engineer here at Evonik. And the training was really difficult for me because I had somebody explain it to me really well, where it felt like I was getting like someone was teaching me. Sorry. So somebody described the kind of training process to me really well, where they said it's like teaching somebody how to play a sport by giving them the rule book. You don't really learn how it works until you go out and you do it. So the training was really difficult because I was learning all of the rules and the procedures around it, but I wasn't really learning how to do my job. So when I went out to actually start doing engineering work, it was really difficult to like pull out of my mind all of the rules and the procedures that I had learned, because there's a lot of them in the pharmaceutical industry, rightly so. And then also pulling on all of the concepts that I learned in school and all of the engineering principles. It was just a lot to handle at once. And like I mentioned, the environment at Evonik is so dynamic and fast paced that you really don't have time to ease into it. You're kind of thrown into it and you got to hit the floor, you got to hit the ground running. So that, from that perspective, it was a little bit challenging. And I think I made some mistakes at first, like most people do, and I learned from that. You learn from your failures, and it made me a better person and a better engineer for that. But it was a little bit hard for me at first for that reason.
And so if you were to do it again, what would you do differently?
I think it would have been more helpful to try and do a better job of maybe shadowing some of the more experienced engineers while I was doing my training. So my strategy, which probably wasn't the right strategy, was like just push through, get all of these trainings done as quickly as I can so I can go out and just start working, because I wanted to just get my hands on things and start doing it. But I think what would have been more helpful is taking a step back and trying to really absorb some of that information more, while also like seeing how other people, more experienced engineers, were actually applying that training and the engineering concepts to the problems that they were working on. I think that would have been a little bit more helpful, almost like watching somebody play the sport instead of just reading the rule book, right? I think that would have helped.
I really like how you put that, because it is it's so true that they can give you the rule book, but until you really start playing, you start doing the sport. I mean, you can read all about learning how to play an instrument too, but unless you get on that thing and start playing, it's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen well at all. Right? I really like how you put that. And to take the time also to, shadow people that are already doing it. I'm sure that opportunity would have been there if you would have taken it, right? And you would have said, "Oh, okay, well, let me see how they do this part here. Now that I'm learning this area here, or whatever," right? That's such a great piece of advice, and I think it's also a great piece of advice for anybody starting new anywhere, any new lab or any new place of work. If there's somebody senior there that knows the ropes and can teach you, that's a lot easier than picking it up from a book. So was it difficult going from Rose-Hulman to Evonik? Did you have to interview? What was that process like, Michelle?
Yeah, so I met Evonik, some of the people that worked for Evonik at a career fair at Rose-Hulman, and they reached out to me in the springtime of my senior year asking for a phone screen. So I had a brief phone screen with one of I believe he was an engineering manager here at the time. And it was just a brief, like, get to know you. They asked me like one kind of simple technical question just to make sure that, they wanted to move forward. And so after that phone screen, I did come here to the site in Lafayette, Indiana, and I did basically a full day interview. I spent some time with HR, just letting them get to know me and kind of learning some of the basics of the company here in Lafayette. And then I spent probably about 3 hours interviewing with a couple different groups of people, mostly engineering functions, some people outside of that, but the kind of key players were people, managers, upper level people in engineering here. And then I also had to give a technical presentation. So I put together a presentation based on a project that I did in one of my unit operations classes, one that I mentioned earlier, and gave that technical presentation to a group of engineers here. And then they gave me kind of a tour of the plant just to see kind of how things work here. I got introduced to some of the engineers in the group, just kind of learn how things work here. And then after that, a couple days later, I got the call that I got the job. So it was a full long day of interviewing, but I really like how I kind of got immersed into not only like meeting the people here, but also getting to see the plant and getting to see what things looked like here. I think it was a really valuable experience and helped my decision to decide to come work here.
That's great. And it must have been exciting also just to do the trip for the interview and so on. I think we tend to underestimate also that level of excitement that we all have when we get there. I see also on your LinkedIn profile that you had some time at am I pronouncing it properly? Olan or
Mm-hmm.
Olin?
Olin.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
Olin. Tell us a little bit about that. They seem like summer internships that you did there.
Yep. So I had two summer internships when I was in college, one after my sophomore and then one after my junior year of school. And I really just wanted to have an opportunity to find out what it was like working in industry. Like I mentioned, I knew pretty early on that my desire was to work in industry, but I didn't really know what industry at first. And I didn't really know what exactly I wanted to be doing in industry. So Olin is a company that they have a very, very large manufacturing plant in Freeport, Texas, which is about an hour south of Houston, right on the Gulf. And I was really interested in, it seemed like there was a lot of different opportunities there because it's such a large plant that I thought it would be a really good opportunity to see a lot of different things and see what I might like doing. It wasn't necessarily the industry that I was looking to get into. The plant that I worked at mostly manufactured chlorine. And so I thought it was just a good opportunity to see what different opportunities there were out there for a chemical engineer in industry. And so the first summer that I worked there, I was doing um, kind of similar to process engineering in a power plant, actually, which was really interesting for me. That's not a typical place that you would find a chemical engineer in a power plant,
Yeah.
but there were full-time chemical engineers working there. So it was an interesting experience. And I got to apply some chemical engineering principles to making power, which was kind of interesting, a unique experience. And then the second summer when I went back there, I was like, I really want to get more experience in the chemical manufacturing portion of the plant. So I did kind of a similar role, but in one of the chlorine manufacturing departments there. And so that was a little bit more similar to like a standard process engineering role in chemical manufacturing. And it was really valuable for me in the sense that I learned that commodity chemical manufacturing was not what I was really looking for because I thought it was interesting, but I felt like if I did that for multiple years, that it would kind of get stale, honestly. And that was part of the motivation why I ended up here at Evonik, because like I mentioned, we're a contract manufacturer. So we're not making the same product every day of the year. We're constantly switching between different products, bringing new products in, learning how to make things better. So it was just a lot more of a dynamic environment. And so that was what was the most valuable part for me of doing those internships, is learning this isn't exactly the industry that I want to be part of.
Which is such an important aspect about gaining that experience, because many times it happens that way where you try something and you're like, that's not so much for me. I think
Yeah.
I'll go do something else. It's so important to also have that as part of your reflection, right? I mean, I know I'm taking you down memory lane here to
Mhm.
go and talk about these moments, but we often don't tend to think back in those times and say, hey, that was really important, that I really found out what I didn't like, what I didn't want to do. And that, Michelle, that was before you got to Evonik, in between Rose-Hulman. You were
Yes.
still at Rose-Hulman, okay? And so
Mhm.
then you get to Evonik, and I'm sure you, as you explained, you get to do some training at the beginning. But what was that like? What was the experience like? Everything new people. You get fresh out of school essentially, but you were excited because they were doing the types of chemistries and the types of manufacturing that you wanted to be doing. And as you said, because as a contract manufacturer, they are switching batches of what they are synthesizing and manufacturing at that moment in time. So tell us a little bit about this experience. Was it a little jaw dropping?
Yeah, it was kind of crazy, to be honest. It Like I mentioned from your earlier question, it was at first a little bit hard for me, just like making that transition, like I had talked about earlier, into like the training and then applying all of that and becoming, a real engineer in industry. And I didn't really get to touch on it a lot, but like I mentioned, it's very fast paced and there's a lot at stake. We have batches of material in our tanks that are worth millions of dollars. So it's not like I can just go out and make a couple changes, try a couple things and see what happens. That's not an option here.
Right.
There's a little bit more at stake there. So it was challenging for me in that perspective. But I think once I hit my stride and I kind of learned how all of this works, how to apply all of this, it felt really rewarding to be able to, I worked for so many years of my life throughout high school and throughout college, and being an engineer, like being educated in engineering isn't easy. by any means. It was a lot of really late nights. It was a lot of stress and, to be honest, tears many times because it's hard. But when you get to finally be in industry and be able to apply those things and actually see the results of it in the plant, seeing the material being made and knowing that that material is going off to people eventually who will be taking this medicine to make them feel better, that is so rewarding. And so that was what really was crazy to me, is like finally being able to use all of this knowledge that I had developed over so many years, over so much pain and hardship at some points, to be able to finally do something that was benefiting society. That's a really cool feeling.
Yeah, I can imagine. And the feeling that you've conquered some kind of a hill, mountain to get there, and now you were able to do, to put it in practice and put it at work. What were some of your and I also, it resonates with me what you said before, that you know if you're in on the floor and stuff is going, and like you can't just make any change willy-nilly the way you want it, because everything has to be documented. Everything has to be, this is like pharmaceutical ingredients that are going to go into people's bodies, so it has to be very regulated how we do it, and how do we manufacture it. How was that a little bit of an eye-opener too? Was that very different than what you had seen before because of all the regulations and stipulations?
Absolutely. It was not what I had expected, especially considering that my internships, so my experience in industry was not in the pharmaceutical industry, it was commodity chemicals, so a lot less regulations there as well. I guess I expected, us being FDA regulated, I knew there was going to be more regulations around what we do, but I didn't realize the amount of just like documentation and paperwork that goes into it. And so that can be a little bit frustrating as an engineer because you've got this engineering brain that I'm constantly thinking of what types of things that we can tweak or modify or experiment with to make things run smoother or more efficiently or without, with less issues. But you can't just go out there and test these things without having, you have to go through it in a very specific, we call it a management of change process, where if I want to change, even if I wanted to just change the temperature of reaction by a couple degrees, you have to go through this whole process of saying, here's the temperature we're currently running at, here's the temperature I want to run at, here's the reason why. And then people have to review that and say, yes, that makes sense. Yes, that's going to be okay from a quality, from a safety perspective. And that can be tough for an engineer because it feels like you're spending a lot less time engineering and a lot more time documenting things, which can be hard. But you just have to, what helped me is keeping in the back of my mind, like when I'm taking medicine, I want to have a level of assurance that this was made with a certain level of quality and safety in mind. And so I, of course, want that same thing for the people who are taking the medications that we're making. So just keeping that in the back of my mind is this is necessary to make sure that things are safe for people. That really kind of helps the frustration of I'm just spending all this time writing up documentation, justification instead of doing engineering work.
Right, right. No, and I guess it's impossible to fight it, right? There's no rhyme or reason why you would want to fight it, because it is helping to keep us safer and making sure that everything is in order. So what can you tell us a little bit about what were your duties when you were first starting at Evonik as a process engineer, and how did that evolve then to where you're now as the production planning manager?
Yeah, that is a long story. I'll try to be a little concise here. So starting as a kind of entry level process engineer, typically what your kind of day-to-day activities are is you get assigned to a specific chemical process, which is essentially, going from a starting material to an end product that we are supplying to our customers, or maybe it's an intermediate that we further process before we send it to our customers.
Mhm.
And you're essentially serving as the technical support for that specific process. So typically for entry level engineers, they're going to give you something that's been run before at our site, or the chemistry has been really developed by the customer. So it's something that we know how to make, that we've done before. It's pretty defined. And so what your role is monitoring the process, making sure everything's running as expected. When we have hiccups, things go wrong, you're providing the kind of engineering support to, first of all, fix that problem and make sure that the production that comes beyond that specific batch isn't going to have the same problem. And then also looking at the impact to that batch where we had that specific problem and saying, okay, is there going to be an issue with the quality? Like, is this something that's okay to then provide to our customers to sell on the market? And as you get more experience in it as an engineer, then typically you'll get the opportunity to work on maybe processes that are a little bit less developed, and you're kind of designing and creating a new process, working a lot with our scientists, our chemists to scale up from a lab scale into the 2,000, 4,000 gallon scale equipment. But that's a little bit more, you need a little bit more experience first before you can kind of get into that work. So kind of towards the end of my time as a process engineer, I was starting to get into that. I worked on a project where I was scaling up from the lab scale to a 50-gallon tank. So I got kind of my feet wet into what that was like. But I knew at that point that I didn't really want to stay on a purely technical route. I had some experiences as a process engineer that made me realize that I was maybe more interested in business or, leadership versus staying in a purely technical role. And so that was what kind of motivated me to take a step away from engineering and into the production superintendent role, which I kind of describe that role as it's production management. So I was still really involved in manufacturing, but I was focused more on how do we manage production in this one production building versus just focusing on a single chemical process. And that was definitely a good stepping stone. It wasn't a purely business role, but it gave me it gave me more visibility to people at our plant that could then kind of kickstart me into maybe a more purely business role like the one I'm in now. So that was kind of the motivation, also the motivation to start the MBA. And then the role that I'm currently in as production planning manager, this is a much more business heavy role. There's a lot more business concepts in the work that I do now, which was my goal. And getting there, it definitely, you wouldn't see somebody go from a strictly technical role into the role that I'm in now. The one that I was in between kind of gave me a good bridge to get where I am, as well as working through the MBA. That definitely taught me a lot of the concepts that I need to know for this role as well. So it was a long road to get there and not one that I expected. at all. If you would have told me 5 years ago that I'd be working in a supply chain role, I would have laughed in your face. But it's just you learn a lot about yourself as you try new things. And I learned that maybe being in a purely engineering role wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do long term.
And I commend you also for, taking the initiative and asking, how can I maybe have more visibility? Or another way of asking that, if people are listening out there, is how can I add more value to what I do here at the company? And asking that question obviously opens up a lot of doors for different people. Um, I'm so curious. You were working while doing the MBA at the same time. How was
Yes.
that? Was that crazy?
Yeah, it was crazy. There were times where I honestly couldn't tell you how I stayed sane. um, Especially being so I for the majority of the time that I was doing my MBA, I was in the production superintendent role, and being a chemical manufacturing plant, we don't have standard hours. We're a 24/7, 365 days of the year
Oh,
manufacturing plant. So we
oh,
don't shut down for the nights. We don't shut down for holidays. So you can imagine that has certain implications for my work-life balance. So I could, get calls from our production building in the evening, in the middle of the night on holidays. So it was, I didn't just have the typical 9 to 5 job where I could go to work for these specific hours and then go home and focus on my schoolwork and then go back to work the next day and do it all over again. So it was really just learning how to be flexible and efficient. Um, Sometimes if the plant was a little bit slower, it meant leaving work earlier than I usually would so I could go home and study. Sometimes it meant if there wasn't something that was urgent and on fire at work and needed done now, that it could wait till tomorrow and I need to go home and I need to study. And also the people here, a lot of the bosses that I've had here are very understanding and very flexible when it comes to allowing people to like leave here if they need to and go work on school. A lot of my bosses were like, yes, you have a final tonight, leave work and go study. They were very understanding. But yes, I don't want to make it seem like it was all sunshine and rainbows all the time. I mean, just like in my engineering studies, there was a lot of times where there were tears and there was a lot of stress, and it didn't feel like I was going to be able to do it. But sometimes you just have to put your nose down and do the work and do the best that you can. Sometimes really all you can do is just give it your best. And I feel like I really learned a lot, even though it was a lot to manage. I learned a lot and it was really valuable. And I see how I can apply a lot of those concepts to all of the roles that I've had here at Evonik. So it was hard, but I don't regret it at all.
yeah. Yeah. I couldn't. I don't see you regretting it at all. I know it must have been a lot of sleepless nights again, and it's like, oh my gosh, what am I doing once again? But what an accomplishment! What an accomplishment, Michelle, and what a way to balance it. I'm sure one of the biggest things that, as you said, you learned was how to manage your time and how to manage your time efficiently and not throw it away, which is such a big lesson for all of us, right? We tend to think, oh, yeah, we have another half an hour, another hour, but sometimes we really don't. And I'm
Mhm.
so excited and enthused to hear about the supportive group that you had there too. And we hear this many times from companies that they do encourage you and they do support you as you try to continue to improve yourself and continue to gain skills and gain training. It sounds like it's a great environment there as well, and to have that kind of support at work, to be able to do that. I mean, what a great way to maintain relations and keep that atmosphere at work, that culture at work. Are there any questions that I didn't ask you that you wish I would have asked you today during this interview?
I liked the question that you've asked maybe some of your other people that have come on here and talked with you, of the question of what's the best advice that you've ever gotten.
Yes.
And when I was thinking about that, I don't know if this is like a specific piece of advice that somebody said to me or just something that I've picked up from conversations with a lot of people throughout the course of my professional career. But I think the piece of advice that I would say is to never underestimate the power of your network. And I think that I've learned that many times throughout my career. I think I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the network that I've created. And the reason why I think that's so valuable is because I've learned that you never know what's going to come out of a connection that you make. And it doesn't even have to be a connection. I mean, there are situations where you meet people at these kind of curated networking events, like, for example, where I met you, right? That was a specific, event where it was meant to create your network and meet people. And it's why we're here talking right now. I think those are great and those are very valuable. But even the simple things like going to lunch with some of your colleagues, or even just like walking over to the coffee machine and grabbing a coffee, like you never know what connections you're going to make and what those connections will lead to. And the example that I was thinking of is, when I was working in process engineering, because of the project that I was working on, got to connect with a man who was working in production management at the time. And because of that connection that I made, at the time, it didn't really feel like anything significant. I was just working with a new person. But because of that connection that we made, he encouraged me later on to apply for this production superintendent role that opened up and then eventually became my boss. I would have never expected that to happen based on the connection that we made working on a project together. But look what that turned into. It turned into my next role, which I think, like I mentioned, kind of was a springboard into the role that I'm currently in now. And who knows what might come out of the connections that I'm making now into the future. And so I think it's really important for, people and especially students to know that don't ever underestimate the connections that you're making and what that might lead to. And even, again, it doesn't have to be these big efforts at these conferences or networking events. It could be as easy as walking over and getting a coffee, or walking over to somebody's desk and talking to a colleague that you haven't met before. It's as simple as that. But you never know what's going to come out of those things. And it's so valuable. And it's so easy these days in the connected world that we're living in. It is so easy. So I just think that there's a lot of value in that, and that people shouldn't underestimate what that can do for their professional career.
And thank you. Thank you for that, because it's so important, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm so thankful that we kept our open networks, or networks open enough that we could connect and that we could have you today on our Pathfinder program. Thank you for being our Pathfinder today, Michelle Korf, the production planning manager at Evonik. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and getting to hear about your journey. Thank you for all the terrific advice as well.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Have a great day. See you soon.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us once again, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.